Hey, it's a blessing to have Scott Fuller on the show today, The Joy of Leadership. Scott, great to have you here.
Thank you, James. Great to be here. Really enjoy this opportunity.
You are jumping in and leading in an organization that is really on the cutting edge of working with kids kind of at that spot where they need assistance, where they need help. They've been through some trauma. They've been through some hardship. Tell us a little bit more about your organization and how it's impacting students, kids, culture, all of that.
Wow, thank you. So Murphy-Harpst has been around for a century. This last year, we just celebrated our centennial year in serving youth. Began back during the last great pandemic when children, lost parents through, the pandemic, through situations of financial, through depression, that kind of thing. And so our agency began as an orphanage.
Okay.
And over the years, needs have changed and shifted. Through the good work of folks back 100 years ago, we now have public education, we've got Medicaid, we've got a number of things, kind of safety nets and services to youth. So Murphy-Harpst, in true to its mission to work with those most vulnerable, has shifted into that child welfare arena. And so we're working with kids today who have experienced the trauma of abandonment, abuse, neglect, many situations in their homes of origin that you just can't get your mind around, tragic situations. And so they're moving from those sort of broken, difficult places, and then coming into a foster system that's also broken, that's not often meeting those needs. And we're in a state of crisis and emergency, children lacking placements and opportunities to really heal. And so Murphy-Harpst is in that special place dealing with that vulnerable population who struggle with behavioral, emotional disorders because of their traumas. They need a place to heal. They need therapeutic services. They need all kinds of other child, experiences. They're like milestones, just to be a child for the first time for many of them as a teenager. And so we provide that kind of support to them in a residential campus-based environment. We provide it in foster family home recruitments where we're training, supporting families who welcome a child into their own home to nurture them there. And many of them will become an adoptive parent, And then we also have group homes where we're working around the state to provide some local-based.
And that's part of your Evolve program.
That would be the Evolve initiative.
Let's chat about the home base first. Kind of describe what that campus looks like to the folks who are listening. 160 acres, kind of nestled into that North Georgia mountain area. Describe what that looks like and how that campus itself is also impacting the kids.
Right. I mean, it is a beautiful landscape there in the foothills of Northwest Georgia. We've got, within those acres, we've got an equine program, a lot of old, beautiful buildings that were brought to us, built there back in the early 1920s. And so our kids are, for the first time, they're moving into a beautiful space, with people who care, but it's those first things, right? When you walk into the door. There's that sort of impressive nature of the buildings. It's like a little college campus, really. But with gymnasium, much like the spread here, but in a more pastoral type setting.
And that gets started. I mean, 100 years ago. I just think about it. I'm in my 20th year in Georgia. We've loved our time here. Lived all over the U.S. and Canada. But man, we've loved our 20 years here. I think about 100 years ago when you guys are starting, how vastly different Georgia was. And frankly, what a cutting edge ministry. I mean, that was absolutely cutting. I mean, it's still cutting edge today, but that's kind of mind blowing 100 years ago.
Right. And it really is inspiring when you kind of look back down the time and look at our early founders and not just, Ethel Harpst and Sarah Murphy, our founders, but so many others at the turn of the 20th century. there were not the available resources.
Right.
And many of these women with the missional heart, they weren't going overseas. Many of them couldn't. They actually weren't allowed, to be in a missional field. And so they were looking to the Appalachian Hills and other impoverished communities. And so they moved into regions. I mean, at that time, Cedartown was a poor milling village.
Right.
No education for families. And so our founder, Ethel Harpst, moves into that community to begin to teach children. And with the meager resources there. And then the pandemic, the Great Depression, all those crises of a nation, men off to war. Right. And then, and mothers, families home, trying to take care of the farm and with meager supplies. And so she is giving her heart and life, to that community and to teaching children, and answers the call in the crisis. We're going to make room. We'll do what we have to do. Bring the children into this room. And so they were putting pallets on floors and just making space. And there wasn't all those resources. And it's the stuff of mission, the good part of the working of this nation, forging a nation forward. Those great stories. So yeah, it's inspirational. I get the opportunity to do that study, see about it, and so walking campus, you're just struck by that history from the early days. Right. Well, your website has a great story of the history, great pictures, just kind of walking through this beautiful story about how they started, and not started through a church at all, right? So just it very missional, very gospel driven, but not being church driven. I mean, very much they were driven by individuals. Absolutely. So Ethel Harpst and Sarah Murphy both individually committed. Like, what can I do? Right. Just starting from the first things. Well, I want to help teach kids. Right. And it just starts. So much of the big story that God's making in this world is with those small things. That's right. And sacrifices. That's right. And so she made those sacrifices, working out of a settlement house, and then just knowing the need to take care of the kids and making the necessary contacts within a missional context of, can we get more support? We need a house for these kids. Right. And so one thing led to another with that kind of energy to building out this 160-acre campus. How long were they involved in the organization? Miss Harpst passed away in the late 60s. Okay. No kidding. So from she actually started in 1914, working in the settlement house. But in 24, that's when they walked up the hill. They got a property that's a local community provided for her. They renovated it, and they went up Harpst Hill into that new home to begin the process of the orphanage. So it's inspirational to us today, because here we are 100 years later. Things look different. Right. But the human dilemma. Right. Of poverty, suffering, the struggle with families and situations is the same. That's right. And the spirit of mission is the same. That's right. Faith, love, and hope, right, that propels us. And so we are answering that call today. Where are those needs? Where are those gaps and crises that as an agency we can step into that space? Right. So that's what we're doing, kind of evolving, innovating foster care solutions to meet today's need. As you're thinking about just what this has looked like over this last 100-year period, as you're looking at that, certainly the constraints of seeing a need, having a vision to meet that need, and then how to accomplish that vision, a lot of that is very financially driven. So I've seen pictures of the campus. It looks amazing. I know that you're heading up advancement, so you're heading up kind of what it is to meet those challenges. Break down what that budget looks like for you guys as you're servicing countless kids who are really on the threshold of disaster. Like you're stepping in there to make sure that they're receiving grace and comfort and preparation for the future, when a kid could be heading in an absolute different direction. So what does that budget look like? Right. So you're correct. That the cost of raising any child, but when you're dealing with a child coming from hard places, and these challenges, that cost is expanded
because
of the services that are needed, right? But so we have about $14 million budget to meet our yearly budget. And so the state of Georgia, because our kids are within the foster care system, is providing 80% of that funding. We're working to close the other 20%. So
about 2.8 million you're looking at.
And there's that gap between those basic services that the state's providing, and then the necessary resources beyond that. They need more than just room and board and just let's watch them, make sure they're safe. These kids need therapeutic care. They need childhood experiences. We take them off campus for off-campus experiences to ball games and so forth. We're providing a robust recreational experience on campus
with equine therapy,
and animal-assisted therapy. We've got an art program going on. Kids are entering into the little art studio and expressing themselves and learning a lot about themselves in that process. So, and these, this is very important because our kids have not been given opportunities to be children. They've not only been hurt, but they've been denied the access of those childhood experiences that allows them to really explore and discover. And giving those opportunities really helps them heal. To experience joy for the first time in that safe environment. So that costs. So we're having to raise above $2 million a year to meet the budget, with a need to really expand, because with the growing behavioral and emotional disorders and the challenges that we're dealing with in child welfare, we need more resources to be able to address those needs.
Now, you guys have the main campus doing amazing stuff there. I had a chance just to kind of dig in on your Evolve program. Walk us through that, because that seems fascinating.
Yeah, so the struggle currently in foster care is we've had a reduction of placement opportunities for children, with a rising number of children entering into foster care. Over the last 5 years, we've seen about 6,000 to 7,000 less foster family homes open.
Wow, I didn't
We've
realize
also
it was that
seen
much. That's just in Georgia?
In Georgia, we had at one time we had around 7,000 to 8,000, foster families. We've got about 3,500, 4,000. So the number kind of fluctuates, but we've saw a reduction in fostering. We also, due to some congressional acts with the Families First Act, some changes in child welfare across the nation, a reduction of campus-based homes, residential placements. I think Georgia lost about 531 congregate care facilities over that same time period.
So, and that's as a result of a decision made by Congress for the...
Well, yeah, it was like multifaceted. It's never even one thing, but it's economy, it's a rise in addictions and the crisis of families, the behavioral, some have termed it the anxious generation, but we are dealing with a different kind of cultural environment that we once did. Children, are challenged. I think it was the Academy of Pediatrics. It said about 80% of American youth are dealing with some significant trauma.
80%,
and that's not foster care, kids in the system. So there's a mental health crisis in general. You don't go through COVID without some trauma.
We saw it glaringly during COVID. Certainly we've watched the trend decline since then. But boy, that seemed to be the top of the mountain for mental health. And
we're seeing problems in a way that we didn't see them 50 years ago as well. There's more eyes on the ground, more information and data. And so there are more children entering into custody, but because of some of the cultural crises, and they're multifaceted, there's been a reduction in placement of families who foster. All that to say is that there's a large gap for placement opportunities, and beyond that, the kind of placements dealing with therapeutic intervention.
Kids who are more than just a home that they need to live in.
Right.
These are kids who need active intervention.
So what's happened in that gap, you've had children presenting over the last 10 years with more substantial behavioral and emotional disorder. Mm-hmm. When that child is taken by DFACS and placed in a family home, a loving Christian family home, ready to do the missional work, right? That family takes that child in. There may not be a whole lot of background, but that child starts to disrupt and present with behaviors, and the family works with them. They're working to try to help do things. But they finally reach this point to this sad reality that we can't keep helping this child. We can't do this. And so they're grieved as a family. Right. The child is given back to DFACS to be taken to another location. So that family and their church, have a negative experience with foster care.
Right.
And so it makes it difficult to recruit, fosterers when they're having negative experiences.
Sure.
And they don't have the resources maybe to meet that mental health need.
Right.
And so we've seen that challenge and the gap. So what's happened is kids are going from a foster family, they're disrupting, they're moving to a group home, they're disrupting, they're entering into a psychiatric treatment facility because there's no other place in a bed available to get some immediate help, maybe because it was a suicidal kind of ideations. And so the child's there, and then the child ends up in a hotel because there's no place to put them. The state of Georgia spent $34 million back in 2023 hoteling children.
Oh my goodness.
So the kids are moving place to place, come here, go away, come here, go away. Kind of a re-traumatizing, languishing, not being served and stabilized. Right. And so we've been seeing that go on. And so the Evolve initiative is a foster care solution. It's the first of its kind in Georgia, where it's really a hybrid of what we've been doing in our campus-based environment, of dealing with youth and that kind of step down from a psychiatric treatment or dealing with behavioral and emotional needs. In a foster family home where they've taken them in a local community, a family home. It's a combination of those type things.
But multiple children in one home?
Right.
So this is like a small version of your main campus.
So, Evolve is a community-based.
Right.
We should have it by the end of this year. We'll have 9 homes.
No kidding.
The bulk of which will be in Augusta.
Okay.
And so these are family-styled homes. Some new, some have been renewed, renovated.
Sure.
And we've got 4 children in a home. We've got the foster parent, the trained fosterer, who goes to the home, is assigned to the home, and is rotating with another fosterer.
Okay.
Right. And we assign a therapist to the home, and the behavioral aides in those to assist. And so we wrap around that family home those professional services and skills.
Sure.
We normalize family, right? We create that for kids, in a family home, in a local community. We wrap the churches, identify the home, come support them. And so that's the model.
Okay.
And so kids who are coming out of a psychiatric treatment facility are stepping down into a family home, but with those adults and multiple staff in that family-styled setting to be there to help them and back each other up and support. And we're seeing a huge success in children more quickly stabilizing.
How many years has that program already been in existence?
So 2 years.
Okay.
So we're in our second year.
So already seeing really positive results with only a 2-year window of comparison. Very interesting.
So 82% of the kids who are entering into that community are moving on to a step down, to a foster family, or to an adoptive family, that type thing.
Political agendas tend to be very short-term thinking. I mean, when we think about that same young person, that same child who is stepping into a home that's being sponsored under this Evolve program, that same kid as an adult is dealing with long-term mental illness, possible incarceration. I'm sure the rate of incarceration is quite high. All of those things are way more expensive than the program that you guys are offering, and with really fewer problems on the Evolve side and fewer successes on the incarceration and long-term mental health side.
Absolutely. That I couldn't have said it better. That we're doing what is right to meet the immediate need of a child.
Right.
And it's saving money down the road, right? I mean,
but you're asking, politicians who are notoriously short-term thinkers, you're asking them to think long-term, and that can be hard. I mean, that's something where having a two-year time frame of data is going to be crucial. But boy, when you guys have 5 years of data and maybe 25 homes or 30 homes, it's going to be huge.
Exactly. So the proof is already there in this early stage, and it's allowed us to really meet specific needs of youth in that local setting. And states already looking to us, okay, where can you expand this? Where else to go? And so we've already got certain targeted locations
coming to you guys.
So so this was this initiative began as a collaborative, leveraging our relationship, long-term relationship, with the state of Georgia, working with this. We've been working with a population of youth who's struggling with, emotional mental health needs for a long time.
Right.
So before this began to ramp up, we've kind of been there.
Right.
And so they've been looking to us for ideas and solutions, and we've been, talking about it. And Cindy Simpson, who worked with Chris 180, she's kind of an architect, kind of helping us draft this plan, this model, and it's been quite effective. It's allowing us to take a child, for instance, on our campus, who may need to step down into a local community, but for whom we can't find a foster family. And so exactly.
They've been
so we can take a young man, and I was just down in Augusta on Friday, saw a young man that just left last week from our campus in Cedartown, went to Augusta. He's placed there. He's all excited. He's going to be in a home setting. He's becoming familiar with the community, going to be able to go to school there, local in a local public school, looking to get jobs. And so it's introducing him back into community.
Sure.
That's been a gap. If you can't, foster families don't tend to foster or adopt those older teens. They want to foster the infants.
Right.
And so where does this young man go? And so having the Evolve gives us opportunity to meet a need for a child who's needing to move on out into community, and we don't have a foster family maybe. It gives us a need to bring a child from a psychiatric treatment facility who needs the kind of, skills right away and the support to stabilize, right? And it also is taking the burden off of that fosterer that's sitting there in a church thinking about fostering. Then we are able to help these kids stabilize, and now we can hand them a child, place a child there that has a potential for more success in that situation. So we're trying to alleviate the burden on the foster care recruitment situation and provide these, community-based answers to a child in a crisis.
So that you're equipping the child, and then in the long range, you're also equipping foster families with the idea that they're going to receive a child that's actually going to be successful in their setting.
Absolutely.
Which is great. So are you targeting certain areas for the Evolve program?
We have a few
obviously Augusta's heavy.
Augusta, and that was sort of a grassroots because I was down there actually speaking in a Sunday school class, and that led to another discussion with someone else in the local community, and just discovering the crisis that they were experiencing. A juvenile court judge said, Scott, I've got children coming before my bench, and I've got nowhere to send them. They're going to hotels. Can Murphy-Harpst do something? We don't have any residential. Foster families aren't taking these kids. Where do they go? And so that was the beginning of a conversation with the city, the community of Augusta, their crisis, and what we have been working on, because we do foster family, we got campus base, so that's where it really began. So that's where our first pod of homes, will be, and so we've already got the program director there, kind of getting that's the sustainable kind of model, and now we're looking to replicate that and in those hot spots. where are the other communities? And so we've been doing that homework.
Right.
And it's not just where's the hot spot, like where's those kids entering into custody, per capita on a more regular basis, but where's the community that's ready to rally?
That's right.
Because that's what Augusta was. They were crying out, sort of that Macedonian cry, right?
That's right.
Come to Macedonia,
help, right?
Come help. And so when you've got people who are ready to answer the call to help, and we had churches that were wanting to do it. And Murphy-Harpst has been around 100 years, and that has been...
Right, they've got a big name.
So that's been a huge part of the Lord's preparing us for this moment. For 100 years, we've been connected, with the robust ministries involved in volunteer efforts of churches. They've known us. And so when the cry for help comes, and then you're able to connect with those church communities and let them know more about it, things came together in the good providence of the Lord.
Right. So you have this the home base up in the northwest foothills, Georgia mountains, servicing kids with some pretty deep trauma, equine therapy, doing some pretty cutting edge things in that space. You've got Evolve that's a step down from that, transitioning kids into that opportunity for getting into community. And then you guys are also doing a ton on just preparing foster families to be foster families.
Right.
And so explain kind of what you guys are doing in regard to those programs. What does that training look like?
Right. So the state has its requirement for families to go through a pretty intensive training process, to be prepared to parent that child. Murphy-Harpst adds layers to that. One of the key things that we do is we train our fosterers in trust-based relational intervention, TBRI.
Okay.
Came out of Texas Christian University, Karen Purvis
I know
Institute.
all about the program. It's
so
phenomenal.
Karen Purvis Institute. So we were one of the first here in Georgia really beginning to adopt that model of care and begin to implement that on our campus. We have a campus manager and trainer on campus to help build that culture back down into our cottages and staff and that kind of thing. And so with the foster care, we apply that with our foster families. So they're going through the program with TBRI, being trained, and we have consultants that we assign, sort of our caseworkers on our side, if you will, that are working with those families who it help get them prepared, lay out the map. This is what it would take, help them with their home, get their home ready, everything from facility to their own training, and then help train them and be there for them 24/7 to answer the call, and to be a support on the step, with the child, intervene. We just had a few weeks ago a situation with a child in the foster family, and it wasn't working well because of some behavioral issues. And so our staff working with them, the foster family's about at the end of their rope. Well, they were proximate enough to campus, so we were able to take the child. We had an availability on campus, and we bring that child onto our campus. And so the foster family's still communicating with the child. The child's getting more, services that it really need.
Care, right?
Exactly. So, so we're able to do that,
That's
provide
really
like that ongoing care for the child and the foster family.
Right.
Now, DFACS does that, but it's often, this is a situation where the crisis, we're in a game now where we don't have all our 11 men on the field.
Sure, yeah, you're trying to stem the tide.
We've got 6 to 7 men on the field, not maybe not our best skilled position players, at least at this point. Some of them are younger, haven't really experienced a lot, so their caseloads are high, the situation's difficult, and so Murphy-Harpst, with our foster care program, we have that layer of support with our staff to help those families.
What happens when the kids, they're coming through the program and they get to the point where they're aging out of the program? What kind of assistance is given for those kids for that adult step?
Wow. So when a child ages out, the child will age out at age 18, or at least they can sign themselves out of care. They can be retained in state custody by their own will up through age 21.
Okay.
So we do have on our campus, we have a transitional living program, and we have kids up to age 21 and they're getting jobs in the community. So we're trying to get them ready for independent living. Had a young man this past fall. He actually was featured in the AJC back, I think it was early January. But he spent time in a hotel before coming to us and our campus, did well, began to, progress, and went into our transitional living program. Well, he's now a student down at Columbus State. So we have those kind of programs.
And in the state of Georgia, they go for free, right? I mean, their tuition is
they can be provided.
Yeah,
in that instance, yes, in a state.
If a student has been in foster care program, if they've been awarded the state, right? That's the way I understand it. For even one day, if they're going to a state school, they get to their tuition.
Right, they've got the coverage through, and there is a tax credit for qualifying child care institute, which we are,
right.
And so there's a tax credit can be sent. We can get those funds that can apply right to Dylan, right, be used to help him through that process in college or as he's preparing to go off to technical school. So he's receiving resource support that way. So yeah, the statistics though, once they age out at 21, they're, as you mentioned earlier, it's just staggering.
Right.
I mean, I think some states, Illinois, I think it was, had reported that 90% of inmates had spent some time in the foster system. So a large number, probably 20 to 30% are going to end up homeless, without a job, in a situation, in incarceration.
It's funny, I hear on a regular basis, I'll still hear, read different articles where they're trying to really denigrate the role of parents in a home. And try to emphasize like, I've read a couple of things even recently saying, the most influential components of a student's life is social media and their peer groups. And it's just not true. You have a loving, caring home where you've got a mom or a mom and dad. It's just unquestionable that is the piece that brings stability into a kid's life.
Right.
And that's really what these kids are missing. They're, for really reasons that are not their own. They didn't cause this, but they were born into a situation that was unstable, and that instability brings about so many other things in their lives.
Right, and that is God's the building blocks, right, for community.
That's right.
It's family, and that early place for that child to learn trust. Is there in her mother's arms.
That's right.
And,
absolutely.
And, so many of the kids we see that they cried, but no one was there.
That's right.
No one heard that voice and responded to their call. And as Christians, we know this, our response to the cry, the way we tend to our children,
absolutely.
the way we train them, they are learning the first things that I can call upon the name of the Lord. My voice can be heard. Yeah. And so, with the population we're serving, that has not been the case often until, at least as far as they feel it, until maybe the arrival on our campus or into that foster family home that's welcoming them.
Well, you look at the biblical example, when Jesus really raises the stakes on our responsibility as believers, three different times he talks about the widow and the orphan. Right, it is our responsibility with that idea. So you said that phrase, will we answer the call? Let's kind of chat about that just for a bit. Like how can families get involved with this vital organization that's standing in the gap for students at a crucial time in their lives? How can families get involved? How can people? Is it just through giving? Is it through fostering? How can they get involved?
Yeah, I think there's various ways. We all don't do the same thing, but we all can do something.
Sure.
To be aware of the crisis there in our own counties here in Georgia. How many kids are in this county, that are in the foster system? To be praying for those that work for these kids.
That's right.
To be committed at that level, to be more aware, to be prayerfully engaged. In terms of working with us or in other organizations, there are a lot of wonderful organizations out there doing this good work. We need more hands on deck. We need a bigger community of Georgia, volunteers, financial, support. But I would say, yes, certainly looking and exploring the possibility of fostering, or beginning to support a foster family. I mean, we're all, as a nation, there's a lot being said these days about our lack of connection.
Right.
You know, we can hear more about what's happening in Europe or happening in Washington or wherever, more than I know what's happening with my neighbor.
That's right.
And to be dialed into our community, to be dialed into ways I can support a foster family in this local community, as a church, to have a culture that's ready to support a child with those mental health and trauma kind of oriented needs, and to be a receiving and a welcoming community, a trained community, right? So that as these opportunities arise, we can answer the call.
Right.
So I'd say there's so many ways like that. And of course, we would love, Murphy-Harpst would love to have, volunteers in the local community come to explore fostering with us, and answer those questions of what it would take, support foster families that we have.
Right.
We can help get them connected with DFACS or anybody else. Right. And help them understand pastoral ministries, how to set up a local ministry opportunity within your church that would be organized and ready to respond. Volunteers for people who want a short-term mission. We would love, we've got UGA, we've got a group of folks from the Wesley Foundation at the University of Georgia.
My son was very involved there. Yeah.
So they are coming on Monday. They'll be there for the spring break.
Nice.
Spend the whole week on our campus.
Are they really?
Working
That's
with our
great.
kids. So we are looking for that kind of university connection, those churches who want a short-term mission trip, who want to do hands-on service, want to work with the rec program, bringing community into our environment, where our kids see people out here in Georgia who care. That's huge.
Love that.
Because when they leave, when they age out, they go back to community. If they happen to be struck with the fear of homelessness or whatever, because of them being in our environment, they're going to be thinking that there's a church that I can call on.
That's right.
Whereas that wouldn't be the case with any agency.
That's right.
So we really need the presence of those volunteers on our campus. That's a good way to get introduced, to discover, is this something for me?
That's right.
Just come, I'll get you and your family set up.
It's the idea of responding, right? I mean, here am I, send me, right? It's that idea of, when we feel that, when we hear that, sense that still small voice in our lives, will we respond to that call? And this is something that is such a deep need right in our own communities, right in our own neighborhoods in many situations. Are we going to respond? And that's the crucial component, is that will the church step forward and respond? And
I think you go back to that apostolic charge there in James 1:27. This is religion, pure and undefiled in the sight of God our Father, and emphasize, highlight that.
That's right.
Father, who fathered us when we were without, broken, our first family, the fall, right? He's fathered us in the Christ. This religion, pure and undefiled in the sight of God our Father, to care for widows and orphans in their distress.
That's right.
Youth ministry, I've been a part of them.
Me too.
I've been saved by them. You're right. I was
my whole life
converted under a very vibrant youth ministry. But youth ministry is more than those pizza parties, and the fifth quarter or whatever you have, to reach out to your kids within your church. They need that. Kids in the church need that. But to think about those foster care ministries, these other kids, this is the charge. Where are those, who's in distress? Who's hurting? And ministry, the call of ministry by a suffering Christ is a cross-bearing ministry.
That's right.
It is a ministry that will take burden, take trouble for others. It's costly.
Yeah.
And so there are those who financially, and go back to, how to be involved, people to commit. And it's just it's the trickle effect of so many individuals that are giving.
To see your campus, you realize it's like generational faithfulness. There's people who have been faithful for a long time at an organization like yours.
And part of the honor, the privilege I've had working with a lot of these churches and in advancement is I get to be a part, not only on campus with our kids and gotten to know them, but I see that. I've seen that in a historic way. I've seen it in the current moment. Murphy-Harpst would not exist, and this good work would not be going forward today, like with the Evolve Initiative, if it weren't for the strength, the deep roots of that missional heart of churches. So we depend on it. Yeah. We draw energy from it and encouragement.
Scott, you're a passionate guy about this. I love hearing the story. Anyone who's not watching this on YouTube, if you're just listening to it, man, your face is just filled with passion. How did you get into this?
Wow. By an interesting turn of providence, we end up in places that we never intended to go by the Lord's goodness. I had my career, I was on a track for law.
Okay.
And politics. That was my path.
Okay.
My dad practiced law for 40 plus years here in the state of Georgia. And after conversion, just my love for the scriptures and wanting to know more, my hunger to teach and show others, what the beauty of Christ, that propelled me into gospel ministry, church planting. Along with that, kind of woven into all that path, was the fact that my grandfather, my dad's father and mother, when I was a young boy, worked at Georgia Baptist Children's Home.
Okay.
So it was already in my young conscience.
Right.
These youth that didn't have families.
Right.
My first job out of college, I went to King University up in Bristol, Tennessee.
Okay.
And one of the men in the development department became the executive director at Cross North School, Incorporated, up in the mountains, North Carolina. Okay. So my first job right out of college, he kept, hey, come work with me, come work with me. So I went and worked for 6 months with him at Cross North School, where I was working as a relief house parent with some of these youth. So it's kind
How old were you at that point?
I was right out of college. So would I have been like 21, 22?
22, yeah.
But I went on to Boston, to Gordon Conwell Seminary and ministry, just a blessed ministry of working with a local congregation up in the mountains, North Carolina, and planting a church. And and I was involved, in some ways with that Cross North School and supporting them along with that path. But after planting the church, we moved back to Georgia. In kind of what I would call a Sabbath time, being honest with the audience out here. I was dealing with a lot of, some people call it burnout. Like I wasn't ready to go to the next church. I wasn't ready to go to the next step. Didn't know really what I wanted to go do. Right. And so I was trying to discover what's going on with me. Why do I not want to do this? I think I'm good at this, right? People want me to do it. They're asking me to do it, but I just don't feel I can do this right now. I just need to go walk with the Lord and love my wife and my kids. And so anyway, the church was gracious, gave me a substantial severance to be able to go rest, recover, make that plan. Yeah. And so we came back to Rome, my hometown, and meeting with some brothers that went to high school with and now elders in a church. And we're having our men's lunch prayer meeting kind of stuff. And one of them knew that I'd worked with kids in the foster system and said, hey, do you know about Murphy-Harpst? And so this was like, I'm 2 months into this sabbatical. Wow. And I need to be busy. So I went down and started what I thought would be volunteer, do some youth ministry, easy stuff.
No kidding. That's how you got into it.
So I started working in the cottage.
Okay.
Like what I did out of college. I thought, this will be good, It's a good way. I did that right out of college. Let me just go work with the kids on the floor. I'll play basketball with them. I'll get involved, do youth ministry, go back, do something easy for a little bit while I'm in the sabbatical. And my life was transformed in that experience.
That's awesome.
I had best way to describe it was, as you're familiar with, Jesus and dealing with the disciples, they're arguing over who's the greatest.
Right. Yeah. Sons of Thunder.
And I will have to say, I believe a lot of, soul searching, and at least for me, there's a lot of pride bound up in burnout, lurking beneath. Yeah. My achievements, what I need to accomplish in my career and pathway, a little bit of a more self-reliant than God-reliant.
Absolutely.
Living on your own resources rather than being devoted in prayer and with a gratitude for the resource of God's grace daily. So I was struggling with that lurking beneath me. And like in the Gospels, I found myself being presented with a child being brought down to size. And seeing the broken, languishing young man, and there's a particular young man in my mind.
Right.
I wept all the way home,
That became the picture of ministry for you.
I then began to, those names were in my book for prayer.
Right.
So all these kids were now my pastoral charge.
Right.
But the Lord really dealt with me and my inner pride and brought me down, seeing that I need him, the Lord, no less than this child.
That's right.
And the Lord is the kind of Lord who meets us precisely in the depth of all our need. And we can depend upon him.
That's right.
And so I was just going through a little bit of a renewal in my own heart.
How many years ago was that, Scott?
Be 10 years ago.
10 years.
10 years ago. So I had no intention of staying here doing this,
right.
And love opportunities to preach. I still do that. Murphy-Harpst and, pulpits out there, they give me plenty of opportunity to do that. And
sure.
I've been out of the pulpit now more full-time for about a year, a little over a year. But I've just found this to be a rewarding place.
Being a guest preacher is pretty awesome.
Yeah, oh, it is.
You get to come in and preach God's word, but you don't have to handle all the church stuff.
Right.
It's a good thing. It's a good gig.
But I've also enjoyed moving around with different congregations and getting to talk to pastors, because I realize I'm coming in here. I want to encourage this congregation,
right?
But I also want to encourage this brother, because I know what it's like.
That's right.
To be, alone on that doorstep and being the one who's holding this charge and in a lonely arena.
Well, and you deal with a lot of dark things as a pastor,
you know,
and unless you're in a pretty large church where there's a whole bunch of staff, the lion's share of guys out there are alone. They're the only person on staff.
Absolutely.
And that can be tough to bear the burdens and to see the darkness, to stand in the gap with a lot of families at hard times, which is what a pastor does. It's why really the rate of burnout is so high. Really. So, yeah,
agreed.
It's interesting. We it's kind of really the drumbeat of this show most of the time is the idea that I really believe people have missed the idea of what the priesthood of the believer truly means. Yeah. Is that for us? I think a lot of times we think, well, people who are in full-time service, that can only be like the professional holy guy behind the pulpit on Sunday or the missionary heading to Africa. When we look at this and say, both of us are in full-time ministry. We're in full-time ministry. Matter of fact, both of us are working with kids full-time.
Right.
But that we miss out on the idea that's the center of God's will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with that priesthood, we are all in this sanctuary.
That's right.
Christ has been raised. Our high priest has admitted us into this sanctuary of his presence to serve, to give, wherever we are. The mom changing the diaper, right? Whatever you're working, the mill worker, wherever you are, right? We do all to the glory of God, and and so it's been a joy. I have to say, I just met before coming here, met with our board chair with a little interview with her, and I asked her, as you're rotating off the board as a board chair, what are 3 words that would summarize, you can describe your experience and time as a board chair here working with kids at Murphy-Harpst? And she kind of was like stumped for a minute, surprised her with it. And she said, well, first is joy.
Okay.
The joy of being able to be here with these kids and to do what I'm getting to do.
Right.
And then she said, humility, because I'm becoming more aware of these kids and their needs and realizing so much about what's out there in this broken world we're in. And she was, and then she said last, gratitude. I'm just grateful.
3 great answers.
And I'm like, wow.
Yeah,
that is so much
answers.
it. And I would say that's really what happened to me. That joy, being, from where I was in burnout.
That's right.
To being engaged with these kids.
And humility.
In so many ways. I could not, and I was like, I always known the gospel since conversion, right? But we see it in different ways and from another angle, in our experiences, our moments, the Lord prepares us. But there's that that situation where, coming in, I was eyeing more what I was doing in my career, my ministry, and that ambition, if you will, and couldn't see the hurt enough. Now, I didn't mean I wasn't aware of the hurts in our own congregation, but I was struggling and not able to see well,
right,
and move into the hurt well.
That's right.
Out of God's grace, and so that enabled me to enter into the ministry and working with you with a joy,
right,
seeing now the hurt in a way I never had before.
We talk about the idea of, I asked a question a while ago, how can families be involved? And ultimately is that idea of you're seeing a need and you're responding to the need, which is exactly what the Lord put in your path as well. You saw a need in a time when you thought this would be a temporary gig, and here you are a decade later, right. just scratching the surface really on what God's going to do,
Absolutely.
And the same thing for your board chair as she steps down. It's that idea of seeing a need and responding. And ultimately that's the question for all Christians is, will we see a need and will we respond? Will we respond when we're asked to go and do, or to write a check, or to be involved in a short-term program? It's ultimately that idea of, will we respond?
Yeah. And you go back to that episode in the Gospels, the last will be first will be last,
right.
The child, and it's about service.
Right.
Jesus didn't come
right.
to be served, but to serve and give his life as a
right.
ransom. And, stepping into that mission,
right,
acting and beginning in those first steps
right.
to the sacrifice. And
right.
I look at those donors. So many people. I'll say this, kind of a little confessional here. In church planting, there was the requirement to go raise funds, mm-hmm. help support the church plant.
Sure.
So that was a part of it. Is the part of the job I hated.
Right.
It's a little bit of
and
a
here you are
divine.
Doing it.
Okay, now this is what you're going to go do, right?
Right.
But really seeing these, I'll ask anybody for the sake of these kids.
Sure, right.
But at the same time, there is this sense of really seeing the sacrificial, the sacred place
mm-hmm.
of donation.
That's right.
Of giving.
That's right.
It's more blessed to give than receive.
That's right.
And I get to be in this this sanctuary with individuals and families and people who want to give
right.
to these youth. And it's such an honor to see that, be a part of it and steward that relationship.
Right. This is a vital organization. I'm impressed with you guys just standing in the gap on really three different tiers with both students and with families, make really and actively seeking to, one, proclaim the gospel faithfully, but to really be with students at that most vulnerable time in their life. And you guys have made that decision. You've made the decision to respond. And listen, I appreciate you being on the show here today so much. It's been a pleasure to learn a little bit more about this amazing organization right here in the state of Georgia that's making a huge impact on kids. It's been great to have you here, Scott.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.